All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so first of all, I do want to start with just a quick introduction and really just say thank you all so much for everything, right? Just participating and contributing your time, your energy, your knowledge, your expertise to these last 7 sessions. As you can see, I hope that everyone got a chance to review, at least just a little bit, skim through the presentation we're going to go through today of the share out summary we promised, as well as the master spreadsheet that we wanted to share of all the comments line by line, categorized, hopefully organized in a way that you all can kind of filter and understand how everything is sort of coming together for us. And so again, I want to also just highlight for Chelsea has been doing a tremendous job as a new staff member and team member to the West team, really centralizing all of this for us and helping us to organize. And so everyone's kind of hands on deck working on the back end. And now that we're going to conclude these sessions, we're definitely going to really 100% pedal to the metal, as they say, and revising for draft number 2. And so that said, I did want to just start us off with, and Chelsea, thank you for sending the message to Fernando and Eugene. I saw that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. First of all, can everyone see my screen with the slideshow? Okay, and let me make it large. I apologize. Full screen. Okay. So as you know, just kind of thinking back to our small working group number 1 and how we originally thought of, condensing this into categories, prioritizing based off of importance and what needed the most integration, which we heard loud and clear was quality of life. What we did with the share out of the summary is, I want to caveat this, that again, it's not everything, but this is to identify really the core issues that we've been talking through, a lot of the main concepts, and really focused with intention around that quality of life integration. So quality of life, you can see, is broken up into 2 different sections because it was so big and so massive for us to dissect. So we've kind of got this more general category, and then you'll see more of the environmental resiliency stuff bundled together in itself. Then we'll get into the land use stuff that we need to cover, as well as mobility. Housing and economy was kind of less complex, not easy, but less complex than land use and mobility. So we'll go through those after. And then, of course, we'll finish with the neighborhoods, implementation, clarity of terms, and then just overall plan feedback, which was one of the biggest buckets as well. And I would also, I'm going to pause so that everyone can take in this slide. And again, if you did not get an opportunity to review this, it was sent within 24 hours. We were hoping to send it earlier, but as you know, we're kind of crunched on time here. So I want to give a little bit of time on each slide for us to kind of just take this information in, and just really with the question from the team, are we getting this right? Is this summary making sense? Have we really truly been intentional with addressing those core issues? More importantly, have we missed the boat on anything? Are there any disconnects? And so I'm going to pause and just allow us to absorb this first slide. Welcome, Jean. I see you're on now. Hi, Eugene. Hi, Fernando.
Good evening.
And whoever would like to just unmute and get us started, or, if there's no comments, questions, we can get thumbs up. I just want to make sure that we are allowing for some space for discussion on each of the slides.
I can go ahead and get started if you'd like to get some feedback.
Yeah, please do, Kathy. Thank you.
I think when I was looking at this slide, what really resonated for me, the missing link, is setting the stage on how quality of life component of this plan is like the big guiding principle that all the other components are spokes from. And I think that needs to be done with a narrative that describes the historical content, as well as the philosophy, or what we're trying to do in moving this quality of life, into the primary focus of this plan. So I think that needs to also have some guiding principles around racial equity, healthiness, vibrancy, and resiliency as the guiding principles that sort of encompass this section of it. And then really telling that narrative of how it's viewed through the quality of life as we look through land use. So as we look through mobility, as we look through economics. And this really helps sets the stage on how all those maps are presenting a story of why we're doing it that way. And that relates to that historical injustice, as well as looking at focus areas that that narrative tells us to point to, and it relates to the different recommendations that are unfolded. So that's what I would like to see on this section, that information, explanation, and narrative that really sets the stage for how this plan is focused this way.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. That is an excellent way to get us started. I actually do just have a follow-up question, and noted all of this is great. I guess just with regards to the guiding principles component, a couple of things that we have mentioned in the plan that we already have are sort of the vision elements coming from Blueprint Denver, but another suggested component that came through the working group was to include in somewhere on the introduction, the West guiding principles that the steering committee carved up together. So is that something kind of just similar to that, incorporating it at the beginning? Is that something that you would like to see built in?
Right, because it's different than Blueprint Denver. Because this particular plan is really focusing more
is someone's phone going off? Someone's not on mute. Sorry.
It's mine.
Oh, was it?
Okay.
I'm surprised not all of us got that. Usually everybody gets it at the same time. Sorry, go ahead.
That's because it's an Amber Alert in Albuquerque.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's right. You're in Santa Fe. That's right.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's see. Yeah, I think that really needs to be different than what Blueprint Denver is, because our story is so much different.
Right.
Than what
The
Blueprint
West
Denver is
guiding
saying.
principles at the top.
Yes. Or else it wouldn't even touch the topics that we're looking at.
Right.
And we just strictly went with Blueprint Denver. And that also sets the stage of why we're doing it this way, because we have historical redlining, historical injustices that this plan is trying to address, as well as that vision of seeing the Detroit tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy. All right. Anyone else would you like to jump in on that and follow up and add anything with regards to any of the pieces of this slide?
Well, for me, and please forgive me if I'm taking you to a different place, but you know, once upon a time, when I was a little girl walking through Valverde, you know, I had a hope and a vision and a desire to reach out and breathe and put my feet in the dirt and walk through the green grass and feel the water run through my fingers every time it rained. And I feel like some of those past hurts resonate deeply, because there were things that were promised. And so why I didn't get involved before, but I'm hell-bent on, so I just feel like, you know, we have to remember that there are families that still live in these neighborhoods that have suffered through crisis after crisis, and we're still kicking, we're still hoping, we're still waiting. And so I want that voice in this message, because I feel like, you know, yes, it's great, and we need gentrification, we need density, but we also have to remember, you know, people that have been in these neighborhoods for years, decades, you know, we don't want to lose their voice. So I don't know where that fits in this, but to me, it's once upon a time, you know, these communities were promised, and once upon a time, these communities were left out. But you know what? You guys are helping to change the narrative. So I don't know where that fits, but to me, that resonates deeply.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you. Others, thoughts, any general feedback, any more specific comments?
kind of building on what Yvonne was saying, I believe too, we don't necessarily have to buy into what is the expectation of the city. You know, this is our West Area Plan, and it's going to be different than the cities. And so I think laying out what that story is that Yvonne was talking about that relates to this West Area Plan, and not assume that those assumptions are a given, that you have to have gentrification, you have to displace people, that you need to do those things. In fact, I would say it's trying to redress some of those conditions that we're seeing that are problems, that we don't have to go down that path. And so it's going to be a different sort of narrative, I think, with that. And I would not want us to assume that we're going to take the city's Blueprint Denver format and just run with it, because I don't think it applies for this neighborhood in so many different ways.
Thank you, Kathy. Any additional comments, feedback on that? Anything from our team? And also I want to make a note that unfortunately we don't have Cortland here with us tonight, but we do have Eugene. And so Eugene, if you want to take a pause to respond to any of these questions or comments, happy to make some space for that, or we can just kind of keep having discussion with the rest of the group.
Really good, just here to listen and make sure that once we go through the high-level feedback as we've understood it and as we believe we've heard it, you know, that's really my understanding and expectation for this evening.
Excellent. Thank you, Eugene.
And I guess Elizabeth isn't here, but you know, certainly hearing what she was saying in that recent email that was sent out, also looking at the reparative and ecological system thinking component that probably isn't addressed here yet. That is also sort of the part of that story as well too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have kept, we saved both Heidi and Elizabeth's emails, and if we receive any other feedback from y'all, we'll absolutely keep that in mind as well. And it's basically going to get filtered into our spreadsheet to be addressed also. So if we don't have a chance to discuss things today, just know that we'll be coming back to you all. We'll also be doing a more full share out and summary next month when we have the full steering committee. And so I would love to hear from others that perhaps haven't had an opportunity to speak, or if you're okay with this slide and we want to keep going here because I'm looking at time, maybe just some thumbs up. Anyone want to add before we continue on?
I guess one more thing for me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No,
certainly looking at the review recommendations from partner agencies and organizations, I think there's a lot to unpack with that. And who is to say which agencies we would be reviewing recommendations, or how that really gets integrated, because it's a really long list in a lot of ways. You've mentioned only a few here, but I think that's one of the things that we really want to see as sort of some of those opportunities that are being created with some of these different plans or projects or climate change funding or other sources that make the recommendations and the implementation real. So I think that needs to be unpacked some more to really understand what all that looks like. And then I guess another thing before we move on is really having that equity justice sort of mapping a part of this whole process as well too, because that also tells the story.
Are you speaking to the environmental justice map that you provided?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
So that is definitely on our list. And actually we were talking about putting that towards the beginning of the quality of life environmental resiliency section as a sidebar, and providing that direct link to the environmental justice map. Kathy, go ahead, Councilwoman Torres, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Just looking at the same bullet point that Kathy pointed out, am I reading that correctly, that review recommendations with those agencies and organizations to ensure their content is current and up to date, reflecting what this report is saying?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilwoman. So it's that and adding additional content that hasn't made itself into the draft. So a few examples, just looking at the organizations and agencies on the screen is, the Climate Action Sustainability Resiliency Office does have a number of projects that we're going to incorporate, such as the needs assessments, reports that are, I believe Jorge Figueroa is working on those. Brad Patterson is another gentleman we're working with on a lot of the tree planting initiative that's happening for Valverde, the food forest initiative that's happening throughout West. Bernice is a woman that we're working with on the large buildings, energy, sort of lowering the energy and the ordinance that just came into play. So those are just some examples of a lot of the new content that's going to start to make its way in, which ties to sort of the core issues and things that we heard from folks in the small working group that asked, why did we miss this? Why did we miss this? And so us reconnecting and kind of restarting those engines with other folks to say, hey, this content is a little bit outdated, right? It was written about 1.5 years ago. There's a lot of new funding, a lot of new updates that can be made. So in addition to those updates, we're asking the agencies, what else can we include in here that we have not included already? Does that help?
Okay, it does. And I think for that, it may not get fully fleshed out because this is a plan that'll last 20 years, right? But I think it is something that that's something in particular for me that becomes that helps with prioritization and what kinds of things I need to be asking as a council person for the area when I'm talking to other agencies. So I think it adds other things down the way, even if it's not kind of all fleshed out by the time this plan gets together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Okay.
Yvonne, I see your hand raised, and I also would like to just quickly address your comment about water. That's going to be on the next slide. If you want, we can move to the next slide because that's the environmental resilient piece that really includes the water component.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
I was just wondering if you could highlight the use of lighting, signage to ensure community safety, because we have little kids that play on the corners where these big semi trucks run through, and then maybe put and design and art for the community or something, but maybe just emphasize and safety in these neighborhoods, or I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds great. Like highlight the use of lighting and signage for community safety and design and art for creation of sense of place. Something like that.
Yeah, because I really want to emphasize we really need some safety in Valverde.
Of course. And we heard that loud and clear. We've got lots of comments on that. So thank you for highlighting that, Yvonne. We will absolutely make note of that. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving unless anyone else has anything on this first slide. All right, not seeing any more hands. Okay, so I'll give you all just a minute for everyone to take this one in. And then again, we'll just kind of go through discussion, make sure that we've got the core issues addressed and can answer any questions. And really, this is your meeting again. So I encourage you all to share. And I know I said I was going to stay quiet, but really, I think the goal here as well is as you're going through the bullets, just really identifying those connections and intersectionalities of the different components of quality of life. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, and I know you had mentioned that this is where the section, maybe you would do the EPA environmental justice mapping section. That also ties to the maps that you already have of the urban heat islands and tree canopies and waterways and impervious surfaces. So that helps sort of set the stage for some of the reasons why you would want to have maybe green zones in general, and that whole philosophy around what that would look like in these neighborhoods, with whether it would be related to increasing the landscaping as well as open space and dealing with new development in looking at green jobs and changing some of the industrial impervious landscape and the way it sort of shapes the land use, in particular to Sun Valley and Valverde. But the other thing I was sort of seeing in here that I was wanting to add is that in regards to the, what is it, the fifth bullet about adding more plan content and material to advocate for increased green space and resilient corridors, especially in your transit and high intensity areas. I think one of the things we saw in the mapping is the gaps where the gulches aren't completed through, and you've listed that in several areas, but I think this is a great way to tie why those green spaces need to make those connections to have more green space for neighborhoods. And then you start looking at which neighborhoods have the highest to lowest amount of park space. You know, that really begins to make the argument of why you want to complete those areas, as well as how it might tie to the green streets or complete streets of changing the neighborhood as well too. So I think that even can be called out a little bit more, in particular to where we're talking about these green spaces, gaps within the existing trails along the gulches, as well as enhancing what still is there and making it better.
Yes, absolutely, Kathy. And I'm just catching up with chat comments here. Okay. Anyone else want to add to anything that's been discussed so far? Any new points?
Well, I don't know if this is the area that addresses, Eugene had explained to me that now Valverde would be connected to Barnum, but I never really saw how we connect with, to Baker, the Baker neighborhood. And it sounds like there's going to be some kind of a bridge or something, more green space. But then I never saw, is there going to be something in there connecting us to Barnum? Because when you go down Tejon and it turns into 2nd Avenue, there's a light there, and then you cross the light and then you're in the Barnum neighborhood. But, and I don't know, maybe it's addressed somewhere else, but I just wanted to bring awareness that, you know, maybe in the plan you have connected us to some of the neighborhoods. So,
Councilwoman, would you like to respond, or did you have your hand up for?
Absolutely. That one, Yvonne, I think is an important one to include, whether it's here or in the mobility section, because it's come up before about safe crossings between Valverde and Barnum, as well as Valverde and Athmar. So even though Athmar is not in this plan, I think it should be mentioned somewhere about the crossings between those main corridors.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Because what that does for me is it makes sure it flags for our DOTI conversations, for our capital improvement conversations, where we might need traffic studies or traffic lights, things like that. So I think it's a great suggestion.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman. And Chelsea's capturing notes this evening, so we'll make sure that that is highlighted and captured. Chelsea, an additional point that I think we should also note with that, just speaking to Athmar Park, is since they're going to be included in the large area ADU rezoning with Valverde, we might want to also include some language on that or revisit the language just to make sure that it is up to date and looks good and we have what we need in there with regards to implementation. Okay, let's see here. Councilwoman Torres, is that an old hand or? Okay, great. Elizabeth?
Old hand, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Great. My connection is not awesome, so I'm going to keep my video off and hope that I still am able to come through. Sorry that I'm late. There's a family dinner that I snuck away from right now, and it's a big family, so I think no one will notice, but I may have to run back out because it's not totally appropriate. But I wanted to check in, or I know that I was late too, and my hope for this meeting as a culmination of our time together is to get clear on what our plan is for what is necessary to have revised, with the aim of getting the plan out to the public in a strategic way that involves all of us collaboratively to structured conversation in the community going forward that builds on some of the momentum that we've had, being able to dig into the complexity of some of these issues, which isn't often able to be held, that complexity and some of the nuance that we've been able to dive in together with isn't always possible in a public process. And I don't know for myself what all needs to for sure happen. I shared some thoughts in an email around things that I think would help that process move forward, but I am eager to hear what CPD's thought is about having engaged in these rich conversations, especially around the systems thinking approach that centers equity and vitality, how the rollout and the changes, what changes will be made to reflect these conversations and what the next steps are. But that will also be helpful for thinking through how we make use of these other conversations that are related with the CASR rapid assessments. Really exciting about the participatory budgeting conversations. I think both of those meetings are going to be helpful for implementation of what comes out of the West Area Plan. And just really hopeful that, you know, after, I think where we are right now is so much stronger than we were at the start of these 8 meetings. And I'm grateful for everyone gathered for making that possible. But I don't know where we are in terms of the concrete changes that have been made or will be made before the plan is released, and want to leave with that knowledge, even if I have to leave and hear it on recording.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So that's a big one to unpack. And, you know, I know that you are sort of limited in your time. So thank you so much for being here with us. I can definitely give that one a stab, but I feel like it's more appropriate to provide some space for Eugene as the project manager to maybe address that for us. Eugene, I don't know if you want to touch on that just kind of lightly right now that we have Elizabeth.
I'd be happy to.
Awesome.
So last week we discussed, you know, we were going through material, which this week, my understanding was we agreed to review our understandings and get some consensus around the material that is being reviewed this evening prior to bringing it to the larger steering committee. So we're going to continue with this process this evening, hopefully reach a level of consensus, get some additional input and guidance, and then figure out how we are going to tackle the information that has been provided to us, and then reveal that and also get some confirmation from the larger steering committee at our August meeting, because again, there are members of this committee, the steering committee, who may not be as plugged in to this working group. And before we go making wholesale changes, we want to make sure that there is consensus from the entire steering committee. So we will be coming forward in at our our August meeting to talk about really the outcomes of this process, information that we feel we can certainly absolutely address, and then really look at how and what it will take to get a second draft completed in time for your review. So tonight is not about coming back to you with here's what we're going to do, because we want to make sure that we've confirmed what it is that we heard before we put pen to paper. So that's a current status on this process.
Does that help, Elizabeth? Any follow-ups from you or from anyone else on the small working group?
It's good to know that that's what the process is. And I'm glad in the ARC, there was a lot of support at our last large steering committee meeting to move forward with this quality of life arena. And I think it would be really, I think the steering committee would likely, because there was alignment and everybody was invited to participate on the quality of life working team, And we did get to have some new folks join who hadn't been totally engaged with that before. I think that that process is going to move swiftly if we come to the steering committee with what the collective recommendations are for the changes and an update on some of the changes that were made that might have been more low-hanging fruit. Like there was some just clarity recommendations for reorganization of the plan before sharing it with the public. So I think it would, like, if it's possible, I think the steering committee would benefit from hearing what recommendations are. And if they have concerns about it, then they could address that. If we're not at that process, fine. But in terms of if it is clear where some of the recommendations are from this committee to take back to the steering committee, there is such alignment when we last were all in communication that it feels like it would be efficient to be able to make recommendations around what those changes were, and anything that we know pretty surely just needs to be done. I imagine that there have been some updates to the plan that have been going on over these past series of 8 meetings along the way. And any updates, if it's not to this meeting, cool. But I hope that those kinds of updates get shared with the steering committee meeting, because I think everybody's excited and enthused that we did pause to address concerns that were held across the steering committee.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, just to echo certainly what Elizabeth is saying, before you came on to the call, Elizabeth, I certainly did highlight that concern as well too, where quality of life needs to be the hub in which this plan is embedded from, and that the other spokes come from quality of life as it relates to land use and mobility and economy. But it's driving the narrative of what we're talking about as a new way of being, in a sense, and looking at these area plans, where we're looking from that main focus point of quality of life. And as we relate to those different parts of those spokes, it also is seeing that quality of life issue being addressed through some of those different recommendations that come through land use, or come through mobility, or come through economics and open space and green space. But if it doesn't include that as the major hub, and to me that needs to be that narrative or that introductory summary that really elevates this section. And that I think we've been consistent on as a subcommittee in coming to the city about on how we want to see the formatting of that change. So in my mind, it's really clear that if quality of life is not the major component that the other pieces come from, then we have not created a consensus between the city and neighborhood residents. Our neighborhood stakeholders have been working on this. And so me, that is what is the main point that we've been trying to talk about for the last 8 meetings, is to have that happen.
Yeah, thank you for reiterating that, Kathy. Speaking to those points, I want to make sure that there's nothing else we need to cover here, because I do want to keep us moving, but also so that we can take a look at in the land use section, which is coming up next, and then mobility thereafter, sort of how we have tried to integrate quality of life into those pieces. So if there is nothing else on this slide, we can go ahead and keep moving. Does anyone else have any final thoughts or feedback before I move forward? Thank you, Kathy, for your chat comment. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So this is a lot, because land use, we had a lot of comments, and we did in mobility as well. And again, really thinking about this with the lens of trying to intentionally integrate quality of life into the other chapters of the plan, land use being one of them. So I'll let us kind of take this slide in, and if folks want to just start a discussion here, and we can go from there. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hey, yes. So this might be what we already intended by this because, oh yeah, sorry, I'm baby duty for a little bit.
Oh my goodness. Go ahead. I don't know if I'll be able to pay attention to you, but go ahead.
Yeah, this might already be the intent of this because it's really hard to summarize onto a single page. Looking at the section that says explore the principles of performance-based and or green zoning as future tools or provide information on analogous tools that are already in practice in Denver. This might have been the intent of saying as future tools, but would hope that either in this summary or in our specific comments, I know there's much more fine grained commentary elsewhere, it is captured that we were discussing this as not an additional layer of zoning to layer upon our two existing layers, but as potential alternatives to our current tools, in that today we are using density-based zoning and form-based zoning, having a third layer of, and we also have overlays and historic districts and conservation overlays and such. Having like a fourth or fifth layer would be detrimental. We were largely discussing this in the realm of like, could we use these tools as a substitute for existing tools?
Yeah, that's great comment and feedback, Jonathan. Thank you for the clarity there, and just kind of taking us back to the points that we had originally been speaking to when talking about these sort of different concepts and how they were brought up originally. Jean, I see your hand up. Would you like to go ahead and go?
Yes, I think I saw it on a different slide, maybe under a different category, but particularly I think it comes up with the opportunity maps, where there was some terminology used like regional centers, things like that, that need to be, we need to have some kind of, what do you call it? A glossary. So I just want to make sure that the glossary that you mentioned somewhere else would also apply to some of these land use terms of things like regional centers is what comes to mind immediately for me.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Jean. And just a quick update on the glossary component. So Community Planning and Development does have a glossary in English and in Spanish that was originally created, I think, back in 2017. I was new and helped create it. So one thing is that our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee is working on that as like a separate project to update with more planning jargon and nuanced terms. But if there is sort of, in addition to that more general glossary and the plan linking to that glossary, if there are other ways that you'd like to see or suggest adding these terms more immediately, or just clarifying them in the plan more immediately rather than having to go all the way to the glossary, also let us know. You know, for example, if it helps to put a call out box like on a certain page, like the opportunities map, calling out certain things. I don't know if that's the kind of change that you wanted to see, or if we can, you know, just focus on the planning glossary update. So if we could get some clarity on sort of how you'd like to see that done.
Yeah, I think where it really came up for me was on the map that has density and, you know, in terms of height allowances.
Okay.
And well, or there was another one that was close by. We were looking at it, but it was where you just kind of said, oh, this is a regional center, this is that. You know, I mean, it was like you had everything marked, but you'd have to really go to another document to even know what characterizes those kinds of terms. So I'm not saying that we necessarily need a glossary embedded, you know, or all terms explained, but I just know, and I can go back and look at that one in particular, and maybe something like a sidebar or something like that. But
okay.
But I do think that might be too much to put in the plan.
Right.
I think it's good for people to know, well, what characterizes a regional center?
Yeah.
Not just height allowances, but there's other kinds of density or use, land use, you know, that characterizes. I think that's important because we're kind of dividing up all these neighborhoods into these kind of uses.
Sure. Yeah. And Kathy, before I go to you, just to follow up on that, Jean, that's why I kind of wanted to understand where you were coming from, because I know a lot of the terms we're also speaking to come specifically from Blueprint Denver Land Use and Transportation Plan. And the context and background of some of these is very expansive. So just a note for our team, I think definitely we can look back and see how we can cross-reference, where we can provide more connection is what I'm hearing. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think even, you know, if you can embed the glossary link right there in the,
okay,
you know,
yeah,
in that, as opposed to a glossary link at the end or something.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll do that. And then in addition to that, there will also be in the document a reference to the CPD planning glossary as well, which is expanded, not just of Blueprint Denver terms, but of many other planning terms.
That'd be good. Thanks.
Kathy, go ahead.
I had added some in the chat that they really do not see the zoning that's listed there as sort of an either or kind of thing. I think it just depends on the nuances that we have in our neighborhoods, and they're so completely different. In fact, when you're talking about large industrial areas in Sun Valley and Valverde, that doesn't exist in many different neighborhoods. So we need different kinds of tools to look at them. And so for me, it's looking at not always having a hammer, but, you know, and tackling the hammer with the same, you know, same situation with every type of scenario we run into with the zoning, that we need to have, you know, screwdrivers, and we need to have present wrenches. And so that we have really the nuances that are available that make sense, particularly when we're talking about impervious surfaces that are so high in Sun Valley and Valverde, that really do need a completely new way of thinking about it. And the other part that I did want to look at, you know, and it would be good to sort of see and put maybe more legs to the community impact reports or equity analysis and what that really means, so that it also helps provide a narrative, so that when it comes to the planning board, they understand what we're talking about. So I think that really needs to be articulated, so that there's no ambiguity in saying, oh, I don't know what they meant by that. You know, I think we need to put a lot of thought in how those can be used as, again, other tools in being able to address as development unfolds or rezoning unfolds, so that there is a sense of what the intent is with that. And then certainly seeing also the impact that perhaps the community land trusts or other ways of having public and private development investment in communities that can also reach those desired outcomes probably needs to be more explicitly listed as well. And then certainly the impacts of involuntary displacement that we have been seeing already, and what that does as we upzone.
All right, thank you, Kathy. And I see there is a lot going on in the chat, y'all. So I wonder if we want to expand on that, or summarize it, or if we can try and keep going. It is 4:45, so I do want to move us into the next slide if possible. Anything to unpack in the chat from folks that have been chatting back and forth?
I mean, I guess I'd ask the folks that are responding here, like in my commentary, I didn't mean to imply that like certain pairs of zoning types won't work together. I was just sort of suggesting that like having all 4 or 5 overlapping wouldn't work. Okay. But I'm not sure if there's agreement on that. So if folks do have questions, I'd be happy to chat about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Any other questions from the group on the land use slide before we keep going here?
I just have a quick question. Is there a way, and this is probably a dumb question, to park some of the things that maybe we're not going to get in this plan, but for future reference for other planning or other strategic plans that might come up available, like, you know, just a really friendly way to say, you know, while the community had asked for this and we could not address that at this time, we will put it in the plan so that later on, if funding comes available, or I don't know, some kind of creative way so we don't lose sight of the things that we did mention. I don't want my neighbors blaming me and saying, hey, Vaughn, you didn't ask for this.
Yeah. I can respond to that, but Katie, do you want to take a stab first? Or I see your hand up, so I want to make sure to create some space for you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, and we can definitely maybe tag team, but
Yeah.
I know that Councilwoman Torres volunteered to kind of take responsibility for anything that can't live or is not appropriate for the West Area Plan, and put that into her own priorities as council president. So, but Yvonne, I also hear you in terms of like, people might not know that. And so then I guess I'd pass it back to you, Val, to know, like, I mean, it would be on our office to publicize that and whatnot, but I don't know if you'd want to flag that somewhere in the plan or something like that.
We can certainly think of ways to capture community desires that maybe don't necessarily nest well or can be addressed by the purpose of a land use plan. But to your point, we can look for ways to capture that information, perhaps identify some content champions. So for example, if something is really under the purview of DEDO or NEST to really help implement, with the help of a council office or a series of offices. Those are the types of things that I think we can find a home for, so that, to your point, Yvonne, they don't necessarily get lost, but may not necessarily fit nicely within the intent of this type of guiding vision document. And then it just really becomes on all of us to keep those things evergreen and fresh and pull them up when, council's going through their work program, when we are going through ours, to see if there are new tools or new opportunities available to us to go back and capture some of that information. So I think that it can be done, and it is one of those long ongoing efforts to make sure that we don't lose that detail.
Thanks, Eugene. And just in addition to that, one of the things that the West team is doing right now, as we are combing through and sort of just writing in how to address each of these comments line by line, is we're sort of working in this functionality of putting in each of these comments into different buckets. So the first one being, what are easier revisions? What are more like grammatical, organization, stuff that we can address that can get done now? What's like the more complex bucket? So that could include partner agency collaboration, council office collaboration, and just kind of those more complex, bigger comments that needed to be unpacked. And then there's this sort of final bucket, Yvonne, that you are mentioning, which is sort of the catch-all of what doesn't fit in the plan, what can we put in this parking lot, what do we need to report back to the council offices, not just Councilwoman Torres, because we've also got Sandoval as well as Councilman Clark in this area. So we're trying to make sure that we're identifying what we can fix now, but then what do we need to communicate to other folks to help us with those efforts later down the line. Kathy, I see your hand up.
Yes, as you were mentioning that, what really struck me, and this is where we really need to see how these folks are part of quality of life. So we need to see those threads of like quality of life is saying we're concerned about displacement, involuntary displacement, or whatever it might be as it relates to land use. And then we need to see that resonate through this particular topic as well, so that we know that we're addressing that quality of life issue through that land use spoke, and it was carried forward. So I think that connection isn't in here yet. And that's maybe something to remind us as we look at land use and mobility and economy, of how that ties back to why we were looking at quality of life being so important.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, folks, it's 4:51. I'm going to keep us going here because we hope to end by 5:30, but if we need to keep going, I think folks from the project team can stay on. I'm asking the questions. So we'll try to get done by 5:30. I'm going to keep us moving here. This is going to be our core issues and sort of the summary of the mobility section. So I know we've got some mobility experts on the line. I also know we haven't heard from a few folks in the room. So just again, want to encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance to share out yet, to just, feel free to share with us your thoughts, feedback, any added discussion. Pretty straightforward. How's this feeling for everybody?
I think good on my part. I know we had a lot of very specific recommendations about very certain streets and intersections captured in the more detailed notes. So feels like a good.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. How about others? Any thumbs up? Any discussion on this one at all? We can keep going. Got a thumbs up from Shayla. Hand up from Kathy. Go ahead.
Yeah, and again, I could certainly go into this mobility section, as well as, again, how it ties to quality of life. So I don't see any clarity totally, and how it relates maybe to some of the those bold ideas I guess we were talking about in regards to highway caps, or making that focus of the parkway. So again, that thread of the quality of life of what we're seeing, and the need for these things to be coming to life in the mobility section. So somehow, again, having that piece of it, so that, again, that ties maybe to the first bullet point of easier navigation. We're reorganized mobility section because we're seeing these threads from quality of life as it relates to mobility. And so some of the things that were coming up in that section related to, whatever it was, lack of green space, urban islands, heat islands, the impact of highways on the health and welfare of residents, as well as trying to do some more traffic calming. So those threads, again, to have it be the highlight of what this focus is as it relates to mobility.
Thank you, Kathy. Elizabeth, would you like to add on that?
Directly adding on what Kathy said, I think these points hit mobility as mobility sort of stands alone, but including, I think it may be really useful for each of the sections to have a section that points to, one, how that section is contributing to quality of life. Renee Martinez Stone had said, like, what if we had at the beginning of every different section a little vignette about how does, like, with the recommendations in this section, a vignette around how a lower income family of 4 or something, or through the eyes of a child, how their experience of equity and vitality looks. What does it look like because this section is in place? And a description of how it contributes to quality of life. But as I was reading this mobility section, these points, even before Kathy spoke, a lot of what Kathy named was what I was thinking of about how do we highlight those threads. You cannot have complete streets without having great integrated design with our green infrastructure planning, with our land use planning, without our housing investments. When mobility infrastructure is paired with good, well thought out plans for housing and housing diversity across price points and the rest, then you get mobility justice. But I think it might be cool to be able to say somewhere in the mobility plan, look for these dimensions of our housing plan, housing and economy plan, and these dimensions of our quality of life or green infrastructure plan, to see related recommendations for mobility that are essential for mobility justice. Just connecting the dots so that people can build the systems thinking capacity and for a given site can see how those different elements come together.
Yeah, and that's excellent, Elizabeth. Really identifying those intersectionalities at the beginning, and this is great feedback for us. I wonder if just want to pause and see if the team has any questions, any follow-up with regards to what that might look like, or does that feel pretty clear for us, team? Maybe some thumbs up, or if you want to add anything.
No questions.
Yeah, I think that was a really helpful explanation, because we've really been, as we've been listening to and giving a lot of thought to this quality of life integration, we've had some ideas, and we've heard like about thoughts around illustrations and maybe color-coded maps. I think that came up where we could tag where different recommendations might overlap with quality of life. But I'm hearing from you that more writing and narrative, maybe like in call out boxes in the beginning or end of sections, or maybe like Val had an idea this week about highlighting recommendations, maybe like with a green asterisk or something that shows in the recommendations that like it also relates to quality of life. Like those are the things we've been thinking. So this is just, yeah, I just want to say thank you for spelling this out more for us. And we're looking forward to digging in.
Thank you, Chelsea. Fernando, any questions, any clarity needed?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah, it's good to hear a little bit more clarity. So, but yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, everyone. If we're okay with mobility, I'm going to keep us going. It's 4:58. We're doing pretty good here. I think we're more than halfway through. Any other questions, comments, feedback with regards to mobility? All right. Housing, another big one. Let us take this one in and feel free to share. Oh, Jonathan, sorry, I was reading. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, just really appreciate this top recommendation. I'm glad that we got this one in here at a high level, et cetera. Here, as you can see, the list could go on. Wanted to clarify in case that wasn't in the sort of, I mean, we've got a list of things here: permanent source, supportive housing, eviction protections, et cetera. Another thing we discussed was a recommendation to study the development by the city or quasi-governmental agencies of mixed income social housing, as opposed to buildings that are exclusively deed restricted low income and don't have that cross subsidy element in the neighborhood. Maybe this was already included in your sort of et cetera list here, but wanted to call that one out in case it was not.
And I'm sorry, you cut on that last part, Jonathan. Can you just repeat the last piece?
Oh, sure. Yeah, just wanted to say, to clarify that was one of our sort of like discussed pathways.
Okay.
Maybe it's sort of included in the et cetera part of this list, but in case it was not, wanted to note it here in case it needs to be a separate recommendation.
Thank you. All right, others?
Yeah, I think also building from what Jonathan was saying, when you talk about the first bullet of how you're mitigating, rent stabilization, first rights of refusal, as well as looking at the emphasis on affordable housing, the 30-50% AMI range, is that challenge of how does it really fit? It doesn't necessarily need to be the West area plan story. It needs to be a whole citywide story in order to deal with the inequity we already have with a lot of more multifamily housing that probably is more affordable than many other neighborhoods, but making this more across the board so it's involving all neighborhoods within the city instead of, again, having that segregation of housing. And the segregation of housing is a big part of this story of what it has been like for people to even be able to buy a home. And certainly the new program the mayor has on down payment assistance is another way to inject that into this area, so that we start naming what are those promising practices of ways that we can make houses more affordable in this neighborhood, or reducing the displacement and maintaining those naturally occurring affordable housing that we have in our neighborhood, but knowing that it needs to not be a segregated point of view and we look at it as a whole city. So that's somehow I'd like to see that mentioned in the housing section, because that whole affordable housing ordinance that was recently passed by City Council kind of encourages that if you're doing 10 units, so then you have to do affordable housing. And so I'm always sort of thinking, okay, where are those 10 unit complexes going to end up at? And how does that tie to housing segregation in the city overall versus a more balanced approach? So I guess that's encouraging that climate of incentives that goes across the board so that we can move out of segregation.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. And I can definitely see us beefing up maybe the introduction of housing to really incorporate that background and those points of messaging, really highlighting the inequities for the neighborhoods. Other thoughts, other feedback from folks we haven't heard from. Again, just not calling you out, just want to make space for everyone. We are trying to make sure that everyone's voice is heard with regards to refining and understanding if we got all this stuff right. So you can also use your thumbs up. Elizabeth, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Who was that speaking?
I had just posted something in the chat, and so I can keep it really short, but I agree with what's bulleted there, but wanted to name that like missing middle housing definition. Part of that revision is necessary, but what I posted was kind of about that bullet that like it's not, we want diversity of housing types, and missing middle is part of that, expanding the diversity. The naming of it is strange a little bit, but like if the plan for housing emphasizes that we want to increase diversity and gets clear about we want housing for intergenerational communities, we want housing for people of diverse incomes, we want housing that has a diversity of types that meets the diversity of needs, including physical needs. I think that that's important. And then putting missing middle in the context of that as one strategy is helpful. But part of the confusion is like, we want more missing middle is like the most awkward sentence to say anyway. We want more diversity is pretty clear. And then pointing to where missing middle has been defined, because it is part of our policy discourse, we need to connect to it. But it's very confusing just as a general reader to see, we want to prioritize more missing anything. So like, and it makes people think that we're missing the middle income housing. And that's not what missing middle is saying. So I think just clarifying the language to say we want diversity for different price points, for different ownership types, for intergenerational, et cetera. And then on the explore incentives that encourage climate adaptive development practices, I think some of that was related to something I'd named before around like, is it possible to slow down climate change by reducing the number of teardowns, where if you're going to tear something down, you have to demonstrate that you're meeting a certain level of ecological and equity performance, like you are tearing it down and providing this number of universal designed dwelling units, or that you are achieving different stormwater or other environmental performance needs. I have no idea if such a policy is possible, but we have a problem with even if there's some recycling of building materials that's happening now, there's a huge loss of embodied energy with all the teardowns. And when those teardowns contribute to just more speculative development, then we're having climate issues and gentrification issues accelerated by the teardown process. And I have no idea what's possible, but since explore as a verb was there, we could explore whether something like that is a possible policy. And I don't know if it is or not, but I think that that's what that bullet was kind of getting at. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that was great clarity, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for particularly explaining that missing middle component and making sure that we have that narrative correct in the draft. And, you know, just as a quick update, you know, we are relooking kind of at land use, I think recommendation number 5 and land use recommendation number 6. Also relooking at the missing middle content that's already included, as well as that expansion and preservation component that is labeled on the map, and expanding and clarifying that in the draft as well. Shayla, I want to go to you next, just because I know that you were trying to speak, and then Kathy, if you don't mind just holding, and then we can go to you next. Go ahead, Shayla.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So I kind of just wanted to echo a little bit what Elizabeth was talking about in the policies surrounding those things, and seeing if it can be tied to performance-based metrics, which I kind of see a little bit different than maybe performance-based zoning. And maybe I have this understanding all incorrect, but I think that if there were a policy in place around performance-based metrics, it would better be able to tie into when new development was coming in, and we could ask for those quality of life pieces to be incorporated into the new builds, into if things are being torn down, etc. Even in like the industrial areas, if there was a performance-based metric that was tied to providing green jobs, for example, that might help us get closer to the piece that we're looking for, to tie the story of quality of life into these different parts of the plan.
Yeah, Shayla, thank you so much. I think that's great feedback. And we'll definitely note that and make sure that we're reviewing the housing section in particular, and maybe also some of the land use recommendations with that lens, really understanding how to incorporate, like you mentioned, some of these examples of that quality of life integration. So thank you for the comments and feedback. Kathy, would you like to go ahead?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Just the past few comments really got me thinking about so many different things that aren't as articulated in this housing section. About what was coming up for me when I was looking at the different housing. You know, we've just recently went through an administrative rezoning of so many parcels of land in both Villa Park and Barnum to allow accessory dwelling units. To me, that needs to be elevated, that is a sense of intergenerational housing, generational wealth, and again, sort of righting that wrong where I couldn't get a loan when I was, you know, maybe in the 50s in whatever neighborhood I wanted to, and how that ties into stabilizations of housing in these neighborhoods. And so I think highlighting what that has already been done and recognizing that, because I think there was a conflict of erasing some of that in the mapping that showed the missing middle sort of taking over those sections that had been administratively just rezoned to allow for accessory dwelling units. And I think that needs to be looked at very closely to see, is that really what we're saying? Is that we want to really change those a lot? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but maybe we need more clarity around it. And to what Elizabeth was saying, when you're looking at the cost of redevelopment, the cost of tearing down and then adding a new building, and the energy it takes and the materials that are used, and the demand on just producing those housing components, that we really need to also see how maybe historical reflections need to be also tied into housing. That yes, we do have a certain amount of flavor. People may not see it as historically significant yet, but there is a lot of that one-story bungalows that do give you a sense of historical content, and that there may be things that could be done that you still have that there, but maybe you have the accessory dwelling unit that integrates a bit more. So I think that needs to be elevated a little bit more to show how that diversity is looked at down the road, but isn't lost or at the cost of scraping and the cost it's creating for climate change as well as resources. So something that I think we haven't touched upon as strongly as we could, and would like to see how that might work in with this housing section.
Excellent points, Kathy. Thank you. Yeah, this is very helpful for us. We appreciate the feedback. Okay, y'all, it's 5:12. I'm going to keep us moving unless anyone else has any other thoughts or points to add to the housing piece. How are we feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Everybody okay so far? I know we're trying to move quickly, so I just want to check in, make sure everybody's good. Okay. So next up is economy. Again, one of the smaller buckets, still very valid. So here are a few points here on how we can improve that section, and let us know if this feels good, if we're missing anything, if you want to expand on any of these. And I think we have like 3 slides left. Any thoughts or feedback on economy?
Can you elaborate a bit on bullet point number 4, local hiring specifically? So is that what, I mean, I look at it and say, if I'm a new company, then it should be a 1-to-1 ratio. If I hire somebody, I need to hire another person from the community, or what does that mean when you say local hiring?
Yeah, that's a good question, Yvonne. You know, we have been working with with DITO, with our economic development department, really trying to pull this content in. I wonder, Eugene, if you might want to take a stab at this one, or if we want to.
There's opportunities to encourage employers, whether they are new to the area or existing employers, to really look to the local talent pool. And to look for incentives, or perhaps this plan can even suggest the exploration or creation of incentives, so that when someone is hired from the local community, you know, that does help with quality of life, in that if that person doesn't have to drive, they maybe can walk, so they're getting exercise. You know, there's one less car on the road, those kinds of things. So that was a reflection of what I think we were hearing around the desire for more residents to be employed by the local businesses in the area, and looking for ways to promote those opportunities.
All right, see some thumbs up, Yvonne. Was that helpful? You good? Okay. Any other questions on economy? Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think on this one, when we look at this section, we don't really see a lot going on with the major corridors that we have of Federal and Colfax, even Sheridan for that matter, Alameda, and how that is, you know, maybe there's opportunities, I think, with the new brownfield funds that you receive for Federal. And I don't know if how housing gets integrated into that, or mixed use types of options in that area along those major corridors that could also improve the economics of the area as well as the housing part of the area. So something that maybe could be explored a little bit more. I really do certainly like the naming, you know, offering living wages, local hiring requirements, talent development. And I think that's where also the green jobs can go to, especially when we're talking about those industrial areas and where we have those 2 neighborhoods that have split sort of land use, industrial and housing. Why does it have to be split up? You know, can't it be more integrated?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess that's one of the things I would like to see in regards to how we can improve on the economic piece of it.
Of the major corridors specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I look at Edgewater and sort of see all the things that they were able to use with Dura or their urban renewal funds. And yet I see our urban renewal funds being used for the 16th Street Mall or something, you know, like,
yeah.
To me, it seems like some of the areas that we need some help with, in particular, I'm thinking of like 8th and Sheridan, we have a little shopette area. How could that have been improved, providing more economic basic services to the neighborhood, as well as enhancing that open space gulch area so it makes a better connection within the neighborhood too.
Yeah, excellent. This is great, Kathy. Thank you for calling out that big major component. We'll absolutely note that for taking it back to the drawing board. Other thoughts, feedback before we keep going?
I named stuff in the chat. I think Kathy mostly hit that. Just, I love all of those bullets and just emphasizing the opportunity that our economy moves towards more of an equitable, regenerative economy, that the jobs that people, part of our vision is that people get to do work that is meaningful and life-giving itself, where the work that people do isn't creating harm to people or the environment surrounding. And just to be explicit that that's what we mean when we want green jobs. Appreciate Jonathan's comment about the same thing with green space, like just color green isn't it, open isn't it, but looking at what the qualities are that we want. I think that stuff's in there. Yeah, I don't need to add anything more there. Appreciate what Kathy said about the connections of our corridors and how we can support more, like, before redlining, people were able to walk to jobs and there were walkable neighborhoods. It was just working in dangerous and toxic jobs. And it would be great to have industry that is industrious for well-being and that people can walk to those jobs. And that summary that Eugene said was so clear and important and what we need. So thanks, Eugene.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, everyone. Neighborhoods, and then we've got clarity of terms and definitions and plan organization, last but certainly not least. So, and I do want to recognize a lot of the neighborhood stuff that we got was around Sun Valley and Valverde, but we did get a few comments for Barnum and Barnum West, as well as West Colfax. And then, Sun Valley was a little bit more expansive, just on like the more transformative projects and things like that. So if there's anything in here folks would like to call out or unpack, let us know. But there weren't any big red flags or complexities that we hadn't already addressed from a larger scale of integration of equity with regards to the neighborhood stuff for our small working group sessions. Anyone have any comments, thoughts, feedback? Does this all look good? Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate your time. Kathy, go ahead.
Yes, I guess I'm feeling that we really didn't dig into the neighborhood piece to even come up with a summary. So I guess I would question that assumption first. I think that's something that we still really need to look at more. I don't think we even really covered that in detail. But the big thing that sort of resonates for me in these neighborhoods is how those projects that were identified are carried through into these different neighborhood sections, that it's not just, oh, these are the transformative ones on this other chapter or part of the West Area Plan, but we don't see how it highlighted or made Barnum more whole, or Sun Valley more whole, or Valverde more whole, or West Colfax more whole, or Villa Park more whole. I think that's what we need to sort of see, is how that helped those individual neighborhoods with all the different components that were discussed in this whole plan to make that a vibrant part of the plan. That's where, as a guiding principle, of vibrancy and quality of life sort of come together, where these neighborhoods are able to be in a better condition or shape than they are now. And so those need to resonate throughout the quality of life to the neighborhood, and that thread needs to be seen. Otherwise, it's a disservice to the neighborhood section, I believe.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing us back to that, Kathy. I do recall that we sort of jammed through the neighborhood section to make space for the larger area-wide recommendation sections. Not to say that this wasn't just as important, but I think if I recall correctly, we had talked about potentially having some discussions and unpacking the individual neighborhood chapters with folks in this group after the working session to really dive in and see if there are things that we had missed. So I do recall us talking about that. But, you know, rest assured, Kathy, we do have all of our neighborhood specific comments and feedback in the master spreadsheet labeled as such and sectioned out to address each of those neighborhoods. I think the bigger core issue and message that we heard, and, you know, team, feel free to add on, but really is from the large area recommendations, tying those in more specifically to the individualities of each neighborhood, the inequities of each neighborhood, given that we have some like Sun Valley and Valverde that have this industrial component to it, that has these larger issues, sort of larger complexities. And so I just kind of wanted to bring it back to that and make sure that that's what we heard as well. Elizabeth, I saw your hand up. Did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and so I just agree with everything that Kathy said, and appreciate, Val, that you named that we did say, instead of having lots of time to go into each individual neighborhood as this whole large group, that we would make time to have those separate. And I think the rollout will make that easier. But I just want to name something very explicit. It has been really amazing to have this group of people consistently actively participating in the steering committee from the beginning, having full representation from these different neighborhoods, so that each of us in our neighborhood understands our own context, but understands how the patterns affecting all 5 neighborhoods play out. And I know at the beginning of this process, one of the logistical, simple administrative tasks to make the plan more readable and allow a Barnum or West Colfax or a Valverde resident to be able to find their home and their place around what matters to them in the plan and see how it connects to the whole, is to be able to improve the numbering system for recommendations that are bewildering in their current state. And so I don't know if that change is happening or there's a guide to make that easy, but one way to make it easy, like I tried to explain what that might look like in the last email. I know our letter originally named some of that, but just looking at ways that it's easy for people to think across scales and to see how a recommendation, a particular recommendation for mobility or quality of life at the general scale, how that particular recommendation might be applied or affect the local scale, and have those neighborhood numbers align so that you can find your place in the whole. I think that that's going to make everything much more readable. And I very much expect that it doesn't have to be that nomenclature, but something's done before release the plan to the public so that people can go to their neighborhood, because we're really going to rely on neighbors in their own neighborhoods on this section, because as a steering committee, we didn't go in depth for each of the individual neighborhoods. And I assume that we're going to do neighborhood specific outreach, but if they can't find how their particular recommendation fits into the whole, then that they can see how Valverde's needs and concerns are similar to the whole area, but also that there's specific adaptations for it. I think we're going to have missed opportunities and barriers.
Chelsea, did you have a question or a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. Elizabeth, I just wanted to respond to that because I really hear that I had the same thought when I was reading through the plan for the first time about the numbering, but I want to make sure we're really clear on what you're suggesting about connecting the dots. Are you saying that in each neighborhood section, there should be like where we have the recommendations, there should be a reflection of the numbers of recommendations in the other sections that they can reference, or the other way around, where like in the larger sections it should reference neighborhoods.
I think it goes both ways, but like when I was reading in the neighborhood plans, like I think I was reading through Barnum, and there was a mobility recommendation number 6 for Barnum. I don't know what the numbers are, but whatever I was like, oh, what's the general recommendation? What's the general statement for this as a particular adaptation? And I went back to mobility and I could not find, it was a totally different thing. The numbers did not pertain to, it was starting over from scratch with Barnum, mobility recommendation 1, 2, 3, and it was ordered for I could not discern an order of why they were ordered in the way that they were. And the numbers had no bearing to M6 in the general plan. And so just thinking about scale, and if there's a general principle or general recommendation that has a neighborhood specific representation, then to give it a name that shows. And maybe to take mobility general recommendation 6 to Barnum involves like 5 different strategies that are all part of 6. Or maybe you've got, like, it's not easy. Like, this is not an easy, like, logical numbering for systems design is like dizzying. And whatever that recommendation in Barnum might be, it might come from M6 and M8 too. There are multiple things that may inform a recommendation, but the more that the numbers can guide you to how it relates to the general recommendation, the easier it's going to be able to understand how the parts and the wholes fit together. If you're later trying to look at how, as a planner, and you're looking at implementation and accountability, how did we apply mobility recommendation 6 across the board to be able to track what that looked like in each neighborhood. And so right now the numbering system is wackadoodle-ish and it's really confusing. I just had a joy in my heart from getting to say wackadoodle in public right now, even though it was just for the fun of it. And I'm surrounded by children's literature right now, and I think that's why. So anyway, I apologize. It was just very confusing, and I had the patience and the willingness to do search terms in PDFs that I could find how those things connected, but that's beyond what we would want people to have to do to be able to understand. We want to make it really easy for people to see how life in Barnum and recommendations here are related to other levels, if that's what's there. Like, one of the outcomes that I think has been awesome is that I have a much better understanding of how West Colfax fits into 6 neighborhoods and how the patterns the needs that we have here have a slightly different manifestation in other neighborhoods. And it allows us to take on larger scale change together. And for WDRC's long-term organizing efforts, like, I think we're building capacity there. And I just want that planning document long-term to be as easy as possible for people to connect together across neighborhoods, to work with our council people to be able to make the policies happen and the implementation happen. And I think that was exceptionally long-winded. I apologize. I think
that was great.
I think it'll make it easier.
That was really such a helpful explanation, and I agree with you. So thank you for unpacking that for us.
All right, folks. I'm gonna.
Can I just butt in?
Oh yeah, Jean, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my phone is gonna die, and I can't really see if anything's on the board anymore. But I just wanted to let you know that I never got a chance to really look into the comments that were made, you know, that master list.
Okay.
And so I'm not responding because I haven't had a chance to really look at it yet. But
no worries. Okay.
I definitely will be.
Okay, Jean, and you
So
know,
thank you.
that is perfectly fine. Earlier on, I had apologized and just explained that, you know, we
Right.
typically want to be sending our documents earlier than 24 hours for folks to review. So by no means did we expect that anyone was going to be able to review everything that we sent,
Okay.
including
Yeah.
the presentation. So feel free to email us, or we can set up a meeting with you to unpack Sun Valley
Yeah.
a little bit more, but whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
So thank you. My phone's going to die. So bye, everybody.
All right, Jean, have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Shayla, see your hand. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I agree with Elizabeth on trying to understand the policy within the different sections that pull through into the neighborhood. And I kind of thought that we would talk a little bit more about neighborhoods specifically, but as I was going through each portion throughout our 8 weeks, I was kind of making notes of like how it was in the main part of the plan, and if I saw it pull through into the Barnum section. And so should I try and put that into writing and communicate it about if I'm like, for example, I think this is only coming off the top of my head because we had a lot of mobility in our section, which is very exciting. But there was like M14 was also connected to M16. And maybe that's just like a refinement as you guys are editing through, but do you want that in writing?
I would say at this point, given the feedback that's been collected, I don't see value in you spending your time doing that unless you just want to. Okay. So one thing that I think, and it doesn't matter as far as what we did, is how we can go about making it a little bit easier. But really the area-wide recommendations that you find in the main part of the draft, those are recommendations that really apply across all 6 neighborhoods where those conditions exist. And then in the neighborhood specific chapters, we try to highlight things that either went above and beyond or were enhancements or modifications to the area-wide recommendations. So Elizabeth, to your point of trying to connect them together, they really initially were not meant to be connected in that way. So all of the recommendations in the area-wide apply across all 6 neighborhoods. And then to get into a greater level of detail, we have recommendations that are unique or specific to a particular neighborhood or a set of neighborhoods where those conditions are unique versus all 6 neighborhoods as a whole. So for anyone that was trying to make the connection between an M16 and where that plays out in the neighborhood chapter, that wasn't our initial intent. But if that is something that's important, which is what I'm hearing and have been hearing, I think we can look at how we might be able to connect and show how an area-wide recommendation is playing out in a specific neighborhood and use the numbering system as an opportunity to do that. The other thing that we have to do, and I have to be the voice to remind us of this, while it is an NPI plan for these 6 neighborhoods, this will be a plan among 19 plans. And so on some level, we also have to think about the organization across all 19 plans so that for a planner or someone in Dottie or within the city, they also understand how to navigate through the document. So that's not to say that we can't go back and take this feedback and look at ways to maybe make that better. But I also feel like I have to make sure to share that this isn't just a one-off document, but it's a part of a series. And so we have to kind of keep that in mind as well. So I just wanted to state that. And while I have the mic, and before the rest of you go, since we are at the end of the time for today, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge Valerie and the work that she's been doing on leading these sessions. I don't know, Valerie, if you've shared with everyone or not, but as a part of her promotion, she's really going to be moving into helping and managing and facilitating implementation. And so this might be the last time that we see her in this capacity, because she is going to transition off of the team as of Friday and really start focusing in on her new role. And so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the hard work that Valerie has done, not only for this 8-week session, but really for the last 3 years. And so just really wanted to take a moment to point that out. And it also means then the core team that is left standing will be me, Chelsea, and Fernando. And so as you all continue to look for ways to make comments or enhancements to the plan, you'll want to make sure that you're getting those comments to the 3 of us so that we can get them in a timely fashion. So just wanted to take a moment to recognize our team member before she goes off to her new role. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. And if it's okay with everyone, I'm still going to join your monthly steering committee meetings, because I do want to see this plan to the finish line. And it's been amazing working with you all. And also, I'm supposed to be at the Villa Park thing, but I sent a message, so we can definitely finish off the last few slides if you all want to go till 6. Unless people want to just go ahead and convene now. So I'm going to leave that to you all, because I do want to recognize we have 3 slides left.
I have to go. Thank you. I love you all. Bye.
Bye, Elizabeth.
Bye, Elizabeth.
Anyone else have any suggestions?
I just wanted to give a shout out to Val, Eugene, Chelsea, all of your team. It's been a lot of arm wrestling, but you've given us grace, and I really appreciate that. And I've learned so much. So I just wanted to thank you guys and just tell you I really appreciate that. And also thank all the 5 heads of the neighborhood. You guys are incredible, and I've learned so much, and I'm just really grateful for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Yvonne. Right back at you. I think our team has learned an incredible amount, and this is only sharpening our tools and making us better in the name of justice and equity. So we appreciate you all as well. So what do we think all? Do we want to end now? Do we want to just take a look at these last couple of slides? I would like to end knowing that we completed the presentation, if that's okay. All right, I'm seeing some head nods.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. All right. Next up is implementation. So we need the chapter. We missed the boat. It was not complete. And so I think to points that we talked about earlier, this is definitely a component of the plan that's going to be more clear, I think, for everyone in terms of like identifying the recommendation policy, understanding the length of time that it might take to implement that policy, persons, organizations, parties, involved, and kind of just be a little bit more clear with the matrix as well. And then, we heard policy recommendations per section should be reflected, particularly at the very beginning of each of the chapters. I kind of went through this already: agency, organizations, length of time, relevant funding opportunities, which blueprint vision elements might apply, and or West guiding principles as well. That could be an additional tab to Kathy's points earlier on the West guiding principles in particular. And then, of course, 2 points that we've heard all evening here: cross-reference policies identified throughout. So again, recognizing which policies are providing that intersectionality and integrating that quality of life to each of these sections. And then clarify funding language and strategies in the plan. Really, that's addressing that comment of that implementation and action items need more teeth. So how can we build in a little bit more for our 20-year vision? Any questions, comments, or feedback on the implementation chapter, just given that it is incomplete and not included right now? Kathy, go ahead.
What I was going to write is really getting some content of what it means for length of time, short, medium, and long term, so that we kind of know what that looks like. Is it 5 years for short? Is it 10 years for mid? I don't know. Is it 20 years for long? So that it really speaks to what Yvonne is saying. If there was a sense of feeling promised something before, where was it ever written? You know, everybody, in the culture that we live in of white supremacy, I mean, everything is the written word is the gospel, and yet it's always changed and the rules change all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I don't want to be in conflict with what we're working from. And so I really want to see that spelled out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would just quickly respond to that to say traditionally or historically, the way that we've responded in or addressed this in other NPI plans is, and team, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe the short term is anywhere between 1 to 5 years. Midterm is more 5 to 10 years, and then long term is anything past 10 years. Is that correct, team? Or maybe just Eugene. I know that historically you've been on MPI 5.5 years, so I'm asking you, not the new members. Well, I think maybe we might have lost Eugene, or maybe he's just still on mute. I can't see.
I don't remember, but I think we can check.
Yeah, we can double check, Kathy, but we do have sort of metrics applied to what that short, mid, and long term is. Any other questions on implementation from folks?
This might not pertain to this slide, but you know, when we made the strategic plan at in the city, in the index, when you first click on it, it takes you right to the Valverde neighborhood. And that probably might be more of a wordsmith. I mean, I know that it's in Word, so it might not be available, but I was just trying to recommend that so that I don't have to scroll all the way down to Valverde. I can just click on Valverde and then it takes me right to that section. Just a thought.
Oh, you mean like just adding hyperlinks throughout the plan so that when you're on there, you can click and go. That's the way we have it for the Denver zoning code. So you go to the table of contents, right? And depending on the zone district you want to look at, it's hyperlinked. So it takes you straight to the section. Is that kind of what you're explaining, Yvonne?
Yeah. And I know it's going to probably be impossible because you have so many things that correlate, but maybe at least just that first page, that index. So if I don't want to scroll through everything, I can quickly get to Valverde. Or
okay, yeah, we can definitely. Yeah, we'll take it back to the drawing board and see what we can do about it. I think it's as simple as just putting the hyperlink into the InDesign document, but let's see if there's more complexities added to that. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay, how are we feeling about implementation? Thumbs up. Anybody else have any comments or feedback before we move forward? Okay, not seeing anything. I'm going to keep us moving. We are almost there. This one was another one that just, you know, lots of clarity needed throughout, specifically for the terms on the sub bullets. Things that came up were lower scale residential neighborhoods, defining a little bit more the owner versus renter components, what innovation means in relation to our industrial areas and job type, industrial transition versus preservation, kind of thinking more about our maps and those different purples that we talked a lot about earlier on. Missing middle expansion and preservation was another big one that I mentioned earlier. We're going to build out and clarify a lot more in the document. Spelling out acronyms. Nobody likes acronyms, so we're trying to make sure that we're addressing that throughout. Provide links or access to the Denver planning terms glossary in English and Spanish. We discussed that earlier. So any questions or comments on this one in particular, this slide?
I think when I look at this one of the things that really comes up for me when you're talking about these different changes in neighborhoods, even if you say missing middle, you know, or it becomes clarified as something different, the information that would be helpful to residents is to understand, how do you get there? You know, in a sense, like when you just say missing middle and you're saying, we're not asking for a zoning change, but in reality, how you get there is probably a zoning change. So in some ways, explaining how that evolves, I think would be important for people to understand as a clarifying way to use this document. Because yeah, it's kind of like the devil's in the details. And that needs to be real clear for people, that when we say innovation, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're going to have, I don't know, a job incubator site at this place, but you need to change the zoning to do it? You know, just it's explaining how the cook got there is, I think, going to be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Any other thoughts or follow-up with regards to comments?
To piggyback off what Kathy said,
go ahead.
I see more and more, like when you're going through documents, they use like little pictures or little bubble or little stick figures, or maybe just a funny little call out box that, you know, like describes what missing middle, or, but I mean, there's other ways than just having to go to the, you know, the glossary, or saying, oh, what is middle missing? Let me go find out what that means. It could be a quick little call out box. Anyway, just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, we got a lot of comments around that missing middle, what's currently in the document as content, and then with regards to the expansion and preservation call out on the, I believe it's the opportunities map in the land use section. So we'll definitely cover that, make sure that's clarified and understood as best as possible. Any other thoughts or feedback on clarity of terms? Anything we might have missed?
I think that transformative section area is still kind of hard to get your head around.
The transformative projects section?
Yeah.
Okay.
And how that really, is it really transformative? You know, I don't know. You know, I think we use that word so loosely these days.
Sure.
It's, I don't know if it really meets that definition. It's just it sounds good, but I think maybe there's another way to sort of look at it.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Kathy. And actually, you know, as a planner, I think it's important for us to go back to the leadership, right, in CPD, and ask this question, because it's something that I'm also kind of confused on, and I wish I could explain a little bit better. I wonder, you know, is there criteria that a transformative project meets? Those are questions that I've been asking just internally. So I think definitely room and space to unpack this a lot more and really understand how we're using that transformative projects. I mean, I think we spent like a good chunk of a couple of steering committee meetings talking about this too earlier on. So we'll make sure to note that as well. Any others? Any other thoughts or feedback? We've got one more slide. Okay, I'm going to keep us going. Last but certainly not least, the overall plan feedback. One of the big pieces of information we received collectively from a lot of these comments is that we need an executive summary. I think one thing that we're talking about internally is this something that belongs like at the beginning of the plan? Does it belong in the plan at all? Does it go on the web page? But that is in development, and it will get translated into Spanish. And that's just something that's kind of on our list of things to do. Review and revise formatting of policy recommendations for ease of use. We spent a lot of time this evening talking about that. I don't know that we need to unpack it more, but we can if we need to. Summarize policy recommendations for ease of use. Again, prioritizing, maybe pulling them to the top of chapters, looking at those suggestions and feedback from our comments. Provide clarity on the maps, data, recommendations. Again, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this point as well. Revisit how mapping reflects recommendations in various sections and use color coding to help ease of use. We need an update on the list of committee members. Yvonne, thank you for putting our eyes on this originally. I think you're the one that like sent me, these are all incorrect and add these. So I found that there is a lot more we need to update. So bear with us as we're updating that. And then last, insert the naming convention to all photos in the plan, the event name and neighborhood. And so we heard you loud and clear on that. That is something that is doable. Are there any other questions or comments or anything that we might have missed just with regards to plan organization? Does it sound good to everyone? How are we feeling? Thumbs up, head nods?
Well, I think I said, like I said earlier, to me this is where you elevate that quality of life section on the orientation of this particular plan. That's completely different. And even though it's integrated with all the other plans, Eugene, I'm still hoping to see that this is going to have maybe a little bit different perspective, but still have a familiarity for planners to be able to still use it, or planning boards or city council.
That's our intent. Much like Jonathan or perhaps Cortland said last week, we have to make sure that folks will pick it up and use it. So that's definitely our intent.
Any other thoughts, comments, feedback on this last slide? Any other general comments before we start to close out? Okay, not hearing anything. If there's nothing else, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And this officially concludes our 8-week session, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to say thank you again so much for your time, energy, effort, subject matter expertise. Our team's going to go back to the drawing board and, well, Eugene's team, because I'm going to be moving on to West implementation, but we'll very much still be connected in that sense. So if you all have any questions, please direct them to Eugene at this point as the project manager. And any other closeout comments before we end? All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thanks for your time and energy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.